Good afternoon, and thank you for coming in, joining by hitting that like button. A lot of information here to share, so we'll get into it. Feeling very energized after a great panel there on O'Shea Duke broadcast channel. They're highlighting Pan-Africanism, this big festival that's going on there in Africa, a celebration of the African Union. So with that, because I do ascribe to some of those Pan-African ideas and such, I figured I'd go on and present the information that I have here on one specific area that I'm mostly invested in, which is our side of that Pan-African conversation, right? So we have work to do. And because of that, let's go on and get into it. Let me do it this way first. You know me, B1 Network, Brother Moses, and I need music. And so I'm gonna turn my music up just a little bit. And we're gonna get into this conversation, man. You see what the title is: Thurgood Marshall Jr. unanimously reelected to the board of directors there at the largest prison institution, or they got all the properties and managing it. And man, that's just crazy. Thurgood Marshall Jr., man, been there since 2002, is still there, reelected to this board of directors that oversees the mass incarceration of African Americans. A slap in the face against the African American legacy of his father, Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Man, just a blatant disrespect there that we got to understand is deep. But let me do this though, because what I wanted to do was have a conversation about that. But I'm feeling very energized here, and because I am energized, I'll give you some more information here. First off of what gave me the energy to go live, and then into the content that we have. So here we go here. I'm gonna share this screen with you so that you might better be able to engage in the information. If you appreciate the visual elements, then be sure to hit that like button as well. Won't be here with you too long, but I do have some powerful information to share. So on this first one, I'm gonna give you just my global or Pan-African view, right? And so I tell people that I am a Pan-Africanist, and inside of that, there is important information. So Pan-Africanist, but I also experience the Pan-African heartbreak. As you see there on the screen, I turn the globe to where when you look at Africa, it is in the shape of a heart, and that heart has been cracked. It has been shattered. It has been fractured in certain spaces. And those spaces where it's most fractured, you can still see life and you can still see energy, but those spaces are also dark. We got work to do because the energy and how we move or transition and the information that we're able to spread across this globe will be vital towards our anti-imperialist agenda as we wrestle or fight for control over natural resources. So here we go, man. Let's get into it. First of all, I will start with the why. Why is it important for me? Well, that's simple. Why Pan-Africanism is important for Brother Moses is because I've been indoctrinated to believe so, to see Black excellence, to see the Black energy from Mandingo to the warrior tribes. All of that has been bred inside of the DNA that makes me who I am. And beyond that, there was the educational element that I've received over time. The third one would be the exposure that I've received. And so that's my why. It's not an economic why, it's just deeply being connected to people in my experience. And so when I'm looking at this Pan-African heartbreak, we would start that on the landmass itself. Why? Because our concept is a multinational enterprise of Black folks, or the diaspora in other words. It's a major collective. You look at it, you're talking about the continent, which consists of all of those names that you see, those labels. But you can remove those labels and just look at the landmass and see that there is a heartbreak that has occurred. One of the ways that they have fought back against that heartbreak is with radical ideas, radical leadership, revolutionary leadership. And on the debate panel stage on O'Shea Duke Jackson's, I brought up Thomas Sankara, a veteran trained in Madagascar who also served in Morocco. His anti-imperialist presidency ended in an assassination. Before he became president, he was appointed prime minister, and before that, an officer there. And so it was an interesting backstory that I also included, is that while he was prime minister, he was arrested after meeting with Muammar Gaddafi. That is August 1983. I was born in 82, and so I wanted to make sure that it was contextually relevant to millennials, those of us who are in our age of leadership. Okay, so this Pan-African heartbreak, one experience that says, is there an opportunity for somebody like me to have either commerce, trade, relations, whatever you might want to call them, interactions with the brothers in the diaspora on the continent of Africa? You see there's being a big heartbreak. And why is there a heartbreak? Well, for a lot of reasons. Spaces like Saudi Arabia have been able to influence it since the beginning of the religious times. The slave trade that would cover that north sector, with Islam as this primary conduit, that control over those resources of that slave trade route and that Saharan trade route, all of that can be attributed to the relationships or the exchanges of information of people across spaces. To tell me that my Pan-Africanist leanings are invalid, or that my business relations are invalid, or my opportunities are small or marginalized, I just don't believe that. And another thing that I saw was, because of this concept of enslaving the Black woman for her assets or reproducibility, things like that, that appetite, that risk appetite that came from those imperialists and those colonists and those treasure seekers inside of Africa is still paramount to how we view Africa today. That destruction of the ideology of a strong Black man happened with the effeminization of the men and then the snatching of the women, of course. And so because of that, there is a heartbreak that I experience. If you zoom out even more from the satellite view or satellite mapping technology view, it goes even further out to show you that this heart rests on Asian America, not just the Saudi Arabian influence, but then also the Middle East, as they would call it. And then you can spread yourself down further to be connected with those people across the way. But those people and their influence, their colonialization or their imperialization, even religion or through whatever means, is the thing that has created this separation of Black men in America and the Blacks of Africa, or the indigenous of Africa in those spaces. And so it started to touch home for me there in Atlanta at Morehouse College 2015, because what we would see is this emergence of African Americans inside of spaces where they're celebrating information and celebrating each other, right? So this is like a concert or something like that. So an author or a publisher or, you know, a businessman in general has put his thoughts over music, and that thing is what's drawing together all of these people from their spaces, one interconnected system or a network of African Americans who could benefit. That same thing happens from a larger view of Africa, this music and its influence. And that was the festival that was celebrated there today. Like we celebrate our Juneteenth, they have every right to celebrate liberation for Africa, even if it is still a goal yet to be attained. Likewise, our goal is still yet to be attained here, that control of resources and such. We have work to do, they have work to do, but that does not stop us from being an interconnected group. Here is this romanticized image, as they like to call it, of Africa, or the cradle of civilization, this out of Africa theory. So many intellectual Africans and African Americans have made this the premise that it has become widely accepted as a theory, which is the out of Africa theory or an argument. And the creation of a romanticized Africa is about commerce and those gold mines and things of that nature. And so because of all of those precious resources and the vying for those resources, I still understand that commercialization of Africa, I don't necessarily ascribe to it, although I do understand. Next, as you zoom out, you're looking at all of this green space, this Maco National Park, or as you cross over the heartland of America. Remember, this is a concept of about a heartbreak, a concept of a heartbreak or a Pan-African heartbreak. So as you move across this heartland, you can see the roads and the things there that can guide you. It is an interconnected network of people, right? And don't let it fool you. Many of these people here are still under the ideology that says white ISIS is cooler, just like we have that same concept here. But moving across the Democratic Republic there, you'll see Rwanda there at the bottom, a big outbreak that happened there between their people who were wrestling with imperial support and appeasement versus anti-imperial revolutionaries, those who saying we ought to be in control of our resources. And it happened there, and it was bloody, it was major, and it was inside of my lifetime, which is why there is a heartbreak even I experience. I can relate with my information that I have on the Black experience, but I also understand that this blackening experience is a global threat to our humanity. And so again, there's major concepts there. Here, as you also see it, is Kampala, which is O'Shea Duke Jackson. That's where he has his business dealing. So I get the idea of economics. I understand it from a media and a dissemination of information lens. And so I thought I would share that information in real time with you all here today. I do root it in the slave trade primarily, not all the way back to religion, but the slave trade and even the trace elements of slavery for religious reasons. You can take a Christian, but not a Muslim. They didn't want any of those Islamic folks. So in that case, the Islamic slave trade then served as a buffer for deportation for those losing tribes. As we move forward, we'll see that the year of the return has failed for us because Pan-Africanist Black Americans dropped the ball. That would be my position, and I would debate that with anyone if they would be willing to have that conversation. That was our side of the Pan-African argument, but on their side and what they're celebrating today, Pan-African Union or Pan-African Unity or Pan-African Liberation, however you word it, on their side of it, they do have still leaders who are advocating for wealth, land, and resources for African Americans. How the individual can materialize that is up to the individual. But again, if that call has been put out there, now it is up to the individual who's a part of the diaspora to accept it. You can't put that on the Pan-African, on the African side and say, well, what are you all doing to benefit us? Right? What are you doing to benefit yourself by leveraging our relationships? Anyway, the space that I visited, you'll see on the left here, as many maps like to put it on the south, but when we're looking at it from a heartbreak lens, South Africa, or what is given the title of South Africa, is really that left ventricle, the left part of the heart for me, as I see it there. And because of that, I've visited there. I wanted to call it out. There's a lot of Shaka Zulu, the most notable Africans on the world and their legacy, that revolutionary mindset going against the British or going against the French, going against the Boers family. That ideology is what I say is the best exchange of information, even as they send over their actors to play Black roles. There are roles that they still need to be giving us real Hollywood blockbuster films on to help inform our leaders. And so I'll stick with my education and entertainment as the lens. That radicalization that happens next only comes with the acquisition of land. So again, we're looking at this thing here from a global perspective. That green part where those resources are, much of that is still dominated or in the control of Africans who are still subject to the imperial rule and their neighbors. And one of the major conflicts or political strife that they have is between those who allow and want and even favor imperial rule and those who don't. There are those who actually do want to have control over it and be able to bridge the gap and do such. And then there are those who would sell that out to that leadership or that authority out to other governing sanctioning bodies or other groups of men. Another part of this Pan-African argument is the inclusion of the Egyptology, or those back to Egypt folks, and what race or what color, what group of those people. And they also talk about it from the lens of Nubian history. And so where the conversation in America starts taking an L, or the heartbreak gets severe for me, is at that bottom part of the heart. I would call it like the aorta or something that's receiving the oxygen and feeding the rich nutrients throughout the rest of that body. As you see here, the Nile. From that Nile, what flows out of the Nile ends up in the Mediterranean. So it was used as a major artery. It connects to the lungs, to which they could receive oxygen via that trade route. That trans-Saharan slave route was all the way a bridge from Egypt to what we would consider by name, or Kemet, or to what we would consider by name West Africa, across that top, if you want to consider that the north. But to me, I don't. I turn the globe on its axis and just look at it from the lens of global priorities. Also, I ascribe to the Pan-Africanist ideology of the out of Africa cradle of civilization, which would flow down from this Nile. And so therefore, keeping it all contextual, Saudi Arabia and their religious, or the influence of Islam, was able to come from this rich harbor. And its influence has been almost detrimental. It's a part of the heartbreak. Yes, at one end, they serve as a great protectorate from the Catholics and the monarchs of the Mediterranean. but at the same time, they would still be complicit in the slaving of blacks who were across this area, or the so-called blacks, indigenous, as you want to call it. It's just a categorical enunciation of their role, which I don't really ascribe to as much. I don't think is as important as understanding that we are a connected and interconnected people. So again, this presentation is there on heart, or the heart rate of Africa. As you see there, we can go towards what we most call West Africa. You start zooming in on the free town that's available. You want to zoom all the way in and start talking slave trade. Then you can zoom into Freetown as one logical space where it happened. Zooming in even further, you can get to where Freetown is, see what it looks like. It's not just being able to have tours and see this space, but to feel connected again and to be able to exchange the information about places like Sierra Leone or Bunsley Island, the fortress that was there, the warfare that it took, the point of no returns, the cannons and everything like that, that made this heartbreak possible. And so there's a whole lot of information on my Pan-African heartbreak lens. That's what I feel about Pan-Africanism. I say we have work to do, which is why I focus on our side of that argument, where we dropped the ball and actually where we picked it up. So that's going to be part 2 of this presentation. I'm going to turn the music up, let it build for about 10 seconds, and then I'm going to get into part 2, which is the American side of that Pan-African argument. All right, and so we're good there. Let me share this one here. This one's a good one as well, because there are a couple of different ideologies that I think were carrying that legacy of Pan-Africanism. Carrying the legacy, number one being, are you for it or against it? Both sides of those are important for our argument. There are people who have espoused their stay here philosophies, do it here philosophy, as well as there are those who said do it somewhere else. And on this part of that, I'm going to talk about the people who said, let's do it here, and some of their failing positions, right? So we can talk about the Marcus Garveys, and we can talk about the Martin Delaney's, we can talk about Jenkins or Liberia movement or Monrovia, which is also demonstrated in the previous slide. But for me, what about those people who said stay and do it here? Because my point is that we dropped the ball, and we've tried that too. So at the top, let me do this. Let me back all the way out to give you the real presentation as it is. All right, slide 1. My daughter saw this image and said, that's a lot of money. She then asked the question, can I have some? I responded, it is a lot of money. What can you do to earn it? To which she replied, clean. She's 11. It was a teachable moment for both of us. We spoke for a minute more about the idea of cleaning to earn money, allowing her ample time to negotiate her chores for allowance articulately. Then I hit her with the parenting comeback of a lifetime, a mathematical word problem. It gets them every time. First, I wanted to set expectations. Smart goals need meticulous detail. So I asked, cleaning what exactly? She said, dishes. It was a good one, right? Because I'm not going to pay her, obviously, for cleaning her own room. So that would be non-negotiable. She would have lost in the beginning. But she says dishes, knowing that dishes are a collective thing. So I asked, how much do people make per hour cleaning dishes? She said about $5. So part one of her failed negotiation was lowballing herself. $5 an hour for cleaning, specifically dishes. Well, team parenting score 1, team children 0. Of course, she was able to do the math. I asked her, how many hours would it take for you to clean in order to make this much money? I kept it in general. I was hoping that she saw the 10,000, but she only saw the 100 on top. So she hastily answered 20 hours. And so parenting victory for me, that is how you secure 20 hours of labor for the low. $100 is easy work. See, here's the kicker. There are rarely more than 20 items to be washed at any given time, and we have a dishwasher. So her actual labor time for cleaning is easy to calculate. Breakfast on most days is the 2 bowls the kids use, the 2 spoons because they have cereal, 2 coffee cups for the parents, maybe 1 spoon. I like my coffee black. It literally takes about 1 minute. Lunch on most days is about 10 minutes of cleaning if, we really do it up. Dinner is her most profitable cleaning period because there are pans that are used which require more effort and more time. I'll give her 20 minutes at tops, and that's at a slow pace, but it really only takes about 5 minutes. She's 11. So her earning potential then is 0.5 of an hour. The allowance for cleaning of $5 an hour is $2.50 a day because she only spends about 30 minutes a day washing dishes. At that rate, her 20 hours of labor is payable every 40 days. Can you imagine $100 every 40 days? That's a W for the parents. It was a good little negotiation with her. I had the same conversation with her brother. He was fortunately able to grasp the concept of $10,000 and how much labor hours it would take for him to earn it. And he said, well, maybe I need a summer job that looks at making $5,000. See, again, this was about SMART goals and using a teachable moment that both of us could learn from. So what are we doing to change our condition? And how are we creating job opportunities for us? Well, let's start by examining the most influential Black Americans and see some of their strategies. As we know, on the top left corner, we have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a great contestant there because he had those jobs advocacy going to the white man and requesting that we have more jobs allocated. It was a carryover from previous civil rights demands. And it was a good carryover there for that, the reason why we shouldn't leave or what we need to happen here for our people argument. Not Pan-African, but what do we need to do to stay here and achieve our fullest potential? But then you also got Wesley Muhammad, PhD, also a great candidate here, part of the Nation of Islam and their contributions to their theological sect of Black diasporic folk. A number of reasons why I would introduce Wesley Muhammad as a legitimate contender there, his book being one, and I am somebody who espouses the vital nature of media and the exchange of information. On the bottom left, though, which is also another political position, would be Eddie S. Glaude Jr., who wrote Democracy in Black. And then on the bottom right, we have Dr. Claude Anderson, who was also brought up, somebody who talks Powernomics. I would say he talks it, and if you've listened to Dr. Claude or education doctorate Claude Anderson, I think that makes him a doctor, then you know that in his legacy, he's also worked through the politics. So the major recurring theme here is using politics as a caveat towards Black liberation here, rather than the Pan-African or the segregationist or the separation of Pan-African, just leave, the one that says go back to Africa. And so I've introduced the main characters here. We can get into a more thorough and comprehensive debate, but first I'm going to start with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. there in the left. His quote, "Shallow understanding of people with goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will." And there's a lot to unpack there. But I'll tell you, number one, his methodology was an appeal to morality. Use that political leverage, go to the good old boys in the South. Even in the book where this quote comes from, contains the letter from Birmingham jail, which was written to the Southern good old boys. Baptist theology, all of that, keep it there. Why is it important to include the theology or theological coalition that he was looking to establish through the letter from Birmingham jail directed to those good old boys and politicians there in the South? Well, because it ascribed to this argument of the lesser of two evils. So go back to the quote, where you have to juxtaposition on one hand a shallow understanding of people with goodwill versus the absolute misunderstanding from people with ill will or ill intentions. Who would be those people with absolute misunderstanding and ill will? That's that Southern Ku Klux Klan carryover. This is Martin Luther King Jr.'s day and era, and his use of politics. Who would be those with the goodwill but shallow understanding? Well, that would be those white liberals or white moderates. And so he was referring to white moderates and saying, I'm starting to believe that working with white moderates is even more frustrating all right. The lesser of two evils. How many of us still ascribe to that today? I tell you, these philosophies didn't work, and they were mostly detrimental. The understanding that two evils or the lesser of two evils is not a choice at all. All right. And so the next character that we're going to bring up, we can talk Martin Luther King Jr. all day. They love talking about that guy, one of the most notable figures to have the conversation around. But let's move forward as we discuss what are we doing to change the condition. We can examine the most influential Black Americans. I've given just four that have a notion that what we need to do here versus the Pan-African. Keep rocking with me. This one is this idea. So first you had the white moderate is an excuse, or the blame game. We've lost out because the white moderator investing our trust and our black political identity politic. And, 85% voting right now, it is Democratic. But even before then, Martin Luther King's era is where that switch was happening as well, but not as pronounced because of the disenfranchisement that still occurs today. I know that, but the reliance or the dependence on the white moderate and why that was not a good idea for us or why it was detrimental. The next is the assault. It's another thing that one could look at and say, well, why aren't we winning? See, that's what they really want to know. When we say, what are we doing to change the condition? What they're actually asking is, what outcomes are you delivering on? What solutions do you see? Where are the Black men trying to create? All of that shit. And so there is an assault that has to be recognized. Dr. Wesley Muhammad, a researcher there for that leader, the Honorable Minister, his quote, so it's critical for Black men to get the fuller picture of this process of our domination in order for us to be inspired to really fight. Central to his argument is the neutralized Black masculinity assault, or the assaults on manhood, Black masculinity, and so forth. That is the name of the actual book. His methodology was an appeal to consciousness, or the collective consciousness there. And you see that being expressed as one who says that we are under a process, or that there is a process that is occurring, and it's mostly being implemented by those seeking to dominate us in most spaces that we would call success: economics, politics, socially, culturally, education, so forth. That there is an actual process that is being used. And so fighting against that process requires information. And once they have that information, he's saying that that information is what is necessary even to inspire the fight. The second thing that it recognizes is that lighter half that says we're still dealing with people who are not inspired to fight, those who are still in favor of imperial rule, even though they look just like us. The thing that loses its validity inside of this argument is that it would have been ended with a phrase, inshallah, God willing, that even if niggas knew that there was a process and started pulling together the pieces of how they could systematically undo their domination, that they could fight back, but it's still saying that they would receive the information and that that information would then inspire them to fight. And then lastly, that they would actually fight back once they have that information. That's the flaw there, but that is the perspective that's there. is the thinking that if we just educate these Negroes, they would finally be in a better position to fight back. It's wishful thinking. It is a hell of a projection, but what it relies upon is, like this phrase says, inshallah, God willing. It still relies upon the condition that your God empowers your people to beat out those people who are not supported by your God. This change that is hoped to be inspired would require real action. So I'm not going to linger there. I will keep this conversation moving because I'm not going to be here with you long. There was another one who talks civil rights and economics. The information that he has shared in his books, I would say, is powerful. Whether you like it or not, the information is powerful. As you read it, you'll start finding sections that you disagree with, some that you strongly agree with. So it's not always about what you agree with, but being able to formulate what you disagree with into real pushback. And that's what we do here as a part of the B1 network as a media. So again, his focal point is Powernomics as the major one. Out of all of his books, Powernomics is the major blueprint that he has in his arsenal. And his legacy ascribes to attempts to create powernomics, or situations that favor African Americans or blacks, whichever title you like. And I hate the semantic diversion, but whichever title you like. I like niggas, first of all, but anyway, that brother there, education doctorate Claude Anderson, has a powerful quote as well. But it's also used as an excuse. It says that, look, the conditions are so hard that here's where the problem is. And he's the one who continuously pushes the wealth as a means of fighting back argument. The purpose of his conversation is to inspire people to want to create more wealth, to compete economically. Economics is a primary driver in power, is the name of the title. Powernomics is that economics is a focal point of power. So we get it. We understand that. And he's the one who says this. After wealth calcification, the second impediment to empowerment is, and I'm summarizing, inappropriate learned behavioral patterns. Again, he's a doctorate of education, meaning that his focal point is more like social studies and studying, the human interaction, development, the household, things like that. And so with that twist of economics on top of it, I love using it as a reference because it gives the focal back to median income, median household income. It personalizes it for us as we consider our economic struggle or economic vying for control of resources. For most, it will only be the economic vying for the resources of their own household. For others, like those who are in media spaces, we know that it's a big fight to be had. For those who are in political spaces, they know that it's politics. But I digress. I'll tell you that his methodology, in my opinion, is an appeal for unification. See, when you're talking about wealth calcification, you're talking about a group. So therefore, you're talking about African Americans as a collective group need to be taken together. That is a call for unification, or us. What is our total number, right? And so the major challenge with that theory is inertia. Some people do get content with their level of achievement in their own household, fight resources and control over their resources. Content because the supplier of their resources is on the imperial side. While you'll still have others of us who ascribe, yes, we do need more connectedness of African Americans who are not on the imperialist side, African Americans who are on the unified Black side. Pan-Africanist takes that same argument and says, now connect that number to those who are across the globe. Claude Anderson says here, though, which is why we bring him up. He's also relevant in context. These are the theories that we're putting out. I've given you mine in the beginning. Now I'm giving you some of the other ones that were there. This fourth one is a good one. Democracy in Black. Chapter 4 talks about white fear. That's the actual name of it. And when you start looking at it, it's not the one that says African Americans are scared to fight back. Wesley Muhammad, that they're not in a place to fight back, or that they don't have the wealth to fight back, because out of all the tools and resources, you can kill somebody with a spoon if you're talking revolutionary change or actually fighting back using a military. Against what odds to which they're fighting back? You can capture that in this quote here, which is why I put it on the screen. But one of the biggest fights that we are fighting back against is the same one they've been fighting against since they was trying to catch us as slaves. That patty roller, police brutality, the criminal justice system, and so forth, or state-sanctioned violence against the inhabitants of those lands. That is the imperial practice that you'll hear most African Americans do have a hard side on. Now, yeah, you do have some folks who are for state-sanctioned violence against Black folks specifically who even look like us. But again, you're most likely to find those positions are people who ascribe to the imperialist world domination view. They actually prefer imperialist control over the resources, including Black minds. They don't like the revolutionary rhetoric. And so they attempt to distract us from what their conversation is. Let me give you his quote. He says, "A race of outlaws or monsters is to be feared and policed because they pose a threat, not just individuals, but also to a cherished way of life." What he was talking about is why white people use their media to paint out Blacks as criminals and savages, and Blacks no matter where they're at. But his was still in reference to here in America. I know Trayvon Martin was the case that he was looking at there in his analysis, but it's bigger than just that. Just like Stephon Clark or Ahmaud Arbery, there are so many instances of where this quote comes or plays. It's intersections, right? So he says a race of outlaws, which is how they're viewed. Is when you say revolutionary, you're talking about people who are now going against the established status quo or laws that are on the books. Even when Martin Luther King Jr. said an unjust law is not a law at all, that didn't work. You were still viewed in this context as an outlaw for speaking out or for marching, protesting, whatever it might be. It was a revolutionary action to try to fight back using politics, using economics, using partnerships, or whatever it was. You were still considered an outlaw. And worse, to be demonized or dehumanized, which is why they needed that argument about humanitarianism. Or what is it? Humanitarian, what is it? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or this humanitarian lens. I'll just tell you like this. In my opinion, his methodology is an appeal for civility. So peace. That, one that says we are not monsters, one that says we are not outside of the law to defend ourselves. It's one that's important. But I also like the part of it that says, yes, they can fear us because we are still a threat. We are just as capable as any men to exert force. While we choose not to, that is the blessing. But we are still just as capable. Like I said, kill somebody with a spoon. It's possible that force can be used. The second part, that we need to be policed, though. The mass incarceration rate can only be fueled by targeted policing and police enforcement, targeted being in our areas, targeted being the laws or the policies that are on books that give them what they would consider justification to snatch Black bodies or to take Black lives. For some, it's economics is why they want imperial rule or authority to govern over others. But for others, it's just not there. We just want to be able to interact and connect. Make some money if we want to make some money, share some information, be it as it may. But he's saying that it wasn't just to them, that individual, but that the rise of the Nat Turner or the revolutionary Black man was viewed as a threat, not just to them, individual masters and who received their pardon from president, but those who ascribe to be enlightened and their enlightened, cherished way of life. And so again, having that same appeal. Why didn't it work? Well, there are a number of reasons. I'll give you one more that takes it into a different space. For me, I ascribe more to what Carter G. Woodson said. It's the miseducation of the Negro, that he is not powerful, that he's always been in a position of subjugation, that he should accept domination and authority, that he should accept it. I don't ascribe to that education. I don't ascribe to the great rulership of the monarch. I don't ascribe to that. They were getting their ass whooped. They continue to get their ass whooped. This enslavement theory that All black minds are still shackled to slavery. Don't let that fool you. And that slavery perspective, that one that says field nigga, house nigga, I do understand that field nigga still has a prevalence inside of America. If there is a chain, like 2 Chainz, if there is still a connection to it, that there is still that radical ideology that is here, that is still being targeted. For me, I say we need more. But what does the Miseducation by Carter G. Woodson say? He says they cannot accept the old ideas and they do not understand the new. And who is he referring to? Well, in his analogy, he was talking about the influence of theology, the church. And he was talking about their influence the influence of those pastors in social uplift. And he was saying how those sects, or those sects, or sectarian disunity, because Christians and Protestants and Catholics and Islam were at war, there was no unity, then they were not able to fight against the monarchs that were imperial or ruling using imperialism and colonizing tactics. The monarchs that were in control, and we were distracted from being able to protect even our own people, even though many of those religions that I just named would ascribe to the protection of those people. Man, so the religion then being disunified was what then is the blame of the scapegoat here as to why ain't nothing working. And so I would say his methodology was an appeal for truth because he wanted the real information. I think that in many instances, when you look at the challenge to his appeal for truth and why it didn't work, Pan-African heartbreak on our side, is that it creates analysis paralysis. All right, so that's free. That's Dr. Carter G. Woodson, Chapter 7, Dissension and Weakness. That's where you can find that quote. Wanted to make sure that I was circling back on that central theme in this chapter. Woodson attributes the duty of social uplift to the church. Each denomination is responsible for the general welfare of their sect and is competing for the interests of their members with sectarian bias. Sectarian bias is the basis for theological disunion. It runs counter to the view of a moral obligation to support the greater good. It preserves the idea of just discrimination against other foreign theologies or dissenting views and weakened sects. Rationalized protection is circular because it allows the persecution of the members of other sects to secure your freedom from religious persecution. The solution is still that return to the greater good, or the unity, the unification theory. But how do you do that? Well, you're going to have to get back to reinforcing those customs of mutual protection extended across sectarian lines. We have some strengths there as Black folks interconnected, whether you're Pan-African or you are right here at home. The strengths is that we can't deny the role of religious institutions in social uplift, not for society and not for the individuals. The church on every corner still exists. They are intricately connected to politics and those other wings. They are the ones who are looking to secure land, building funds, things like that, assets. And thus their role is also the responsibility for feeding, clothing, employing, and doing those other major things that they can do. I would say their biggest strength there is the connection of people to information that would be vital for their uplift. Major weakness, though, is that there is a history of violations, religion to religion. Like, why don't you trust Islam? Well, because they were part of the slave trade. Why don't you trust those Southern Baptists on the white side? Well, because they were part of the slave trade and they still ascribe to that traditional set. Why don't you trust religion in general? Because look what they're doing with the money, not giving back to the people as it could be, or to the extent that we're seeing the positive uplift. Things like that, a number of reasons. I just call it a history of violations that cannot be ignored. Those violations created this stigma of distrust, and it continues to perpetuate this cycle of disunity. There is an opportunity that we're looking at, though, which is reconciliation. Reconciliation does promote universal goodwill. It would help us achieve that unification theory. And it also promotes equality, right? So if you got those customs, the customs of mutual respect extended across those sects, then you have opportunity being realized in real actions. And lastly, the threats. The threat to the solution, which is a return to the greater good once again, since they say we don't drop solutions. You may not like it, but I'm gonna give you the facts. But the threat is that there will continue to be sadistic interference and intolerance with military intervention. What do I mean by that? Because you're still in a world with competing folks and ideologies, those ideologies that are sadistic, that will not say, man, the ones that will say, man, fuck your code. There was a code of the streets. The ones that said, man, fuck that code, that would go against the very grain, those treaties or the violations of treaties, the stigma. There will be sadistic interference, or those people who will not ascribe to that code. And they will continue to operate with intolerance of your sect or of your unified group, our group. And they do so with intervention. So the major threat is still that they will continue to arm themselves against a unified greater good. So I gave you information also about Democracy in Black. It is a good book. There's so many different quotes and things that can be pulled from it. But from this concept, I thought this would be a good one here. It laid out how they're viewing us as outlaws and monsters. They continue to use that. It keeps it relevant. Why? Because these are still the same people who know that they're viewed as monsters and over-policed, who are asking for some type of coalition with those people who are choosing to abuse them. Also, the powernomics, because of the economic argument, people like to run towards economics. If you want to run there, I'm going to give you one of the leading voices on economics, and what they're saying is the blueprint for Black power, like Amos Wilson. I could have went there as well, but Claude Anderson's Powernomics is a good one. He even says inappropriate learned behavioral patterns as a cause for why we won't succeed in those spaces. Why? He says we have some learned behavioral patterns that make niggas toxic to even other niggas. He says it, he admits it. Do you agree or do you disagree? His information is available there in Powernomics. I wanted to make sure that source hit the screen. Also, The Assault by Dr. Wesley Muhammad. That is another great source central to this conversation. This neutralizing Black America theme, what they put in the food, he presents evidence of chemical castration, what they put in the plants and things, and that being our predominant diet and diabetes. I mean, there's so much evidence there inside of this book that shows you just the extent to which the biochemical warfare, even just the extent that that same enemy is using against us. And so if you, Pan-African, stay here, you know what your enemy is doing. I would say from his, as I pivot to this next one, this whole health, wealth, and knowledge of self is a predominant theme. Health is where his solution is, but you got to check out the book and see all of that information. The other one that I brought was, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. there, and this white moderate. Candace Owens is somebody who says the Democratic Party and this white moderate, and the liberals, and what the Democratic Party isn't doing. I would say they're continuing that legacy of discourse as people are considering what should Black people do. Anyway, so just keep this shit contextual. This information is vital. There's some original documents like the United States Constitution of the United States, which is supreme law for anybody who's saying, look, these are the laws and this is what the law says. All right, so there's some supreme laws that most people are arguing, whether you're for or against it. Supreme laws, people like to appeal to supreme law when they said, I am a Second Amendment or a 2A, the right to bear arms and all of that shit, that revolutionary thinking. The same people who wrote the Constitution were declaring, and that is the same declaration from those radical or revolutionary minds like the Mike Xavier Johnsons, those folks who were saying, well, we joined the military for training. Why did you join the military for training? Because you're probably thinking about 2A and supreme law. You want the law to be in your favor, or the supreme law to be in your favor in any conflict, or as you resolve provocation from those who are wishing to usurp your authority as an individual. Its effective date is March 4th, 1789. So it doesn't quite go back to the Pan-Africanist theories that I have brought in, but we know that from there, you did have Monrovia come in the early 1800s as another idea or another example of when he was like, man, niggas, go back to Africa again. So anyway, that was established by the founding fathers. I typically don't use these ones as much, but I bring them out as just a primary starting point for information. This one, the Civil Rights Act, Section 1981. It grants all individuals within the U.S. jurisdiction the same rights and benefits as enjoyed by white citizens. So this is this differentiation, right? This economic argument saying that, look, I got the right to the contract as you. I could work for a living or work for hire type of agreement that was then nullified by them saying, look, there is no law that a white man has to uphold or is beholden to if it's in relation to a black man, the non-citizenship and all of that shit that was supposedly resolved you're using this legislation here or using politics or being close with white moderates and shit, this civil rights. And as we know, that then expanded towards what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was doing. So again, this civil rights are working with white moderates or people like that to try to get your gain or access to your full enjoyment of life and such. We can show you why that shit didn't work, again, using the data and then using some of the most notable black folks who espouse these same philosophies. So another one is this, as we get to the civil rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the one that I mentioned. Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So again, all of these major concepts about unification, all of us being together in this, consciousness, appeal to truth, all of those are still chalk laden as theories. And if we can deal with that idea itself and debunk that theory or prove that that theory was a losing argument, then you can move forward towards, well, what is a actual solution that should work? My premise is this. Look, Pan-Africanists does include those who are here in America and those who are moving and using the go back to Africa doctrine, right? Sorry, adoption date, December 10th, 1948 for that information. Let me bring me back in the screen because that is about as much as I want to give as I drop facts and as I drop that information. The information that I drop will be deeply rooted in sources. I will share black authors. Of course, some people would want to hold that shit against me, but no, you ain't gonna hold it against me. I can present both sides of the arguments or using perspectives that do kind of carry that line, and we can have that debate. But what we won't do is make the conversation about black celebrities today and that stupid shit. I will give you the information that says, look, if you want the political argument, the Congressional Black Caucus are the ones, or the NAACP are the ones who are taking that political position, knowing good and goddamn well that they getting their ass whooped. But I'm not the one who told you to take the political argument in the first place. But if you try to debate me on black politics, I will give you who you're surrendering your authority to. While at the same time, I tell you that's us. Your authority is the one that you're seeking to reserve. Your control over resources, you're vying for more resources, is the one that you're continuing to fight for. Yours. And because it's yours, then it will be up to you to decide how you execute that. All right. And so let me do this last one now that I only have about 6 minutes left in this hour presentation. Is this the one that I was looking at? So it started with this one. I was only pulling the $50,000 because I was looking for $40,000, and $10,000 increments seem to be the most reasonable, just to show people that that's not a lot of money, because people are talking about this 40 acres and a mule argument as if you can't buy an entire acre for $1,000. And we know that there are people who would not want 40 acres. They would rather just take the $40,000. That's on them if they are very limited in their view of what reparations looks like. But I wanted to show at least a small visual aid of $40,000. To me, that is something like what you would fit in a little briefcase. And it's not the argument that I'm actually having when I discuss reparations. I deeply rooted in slavery, which is why this image here is when I first started having YouTube conversations with George Macon, was my actual attempt to go back to the actual reservation where my people come from. Jenkins Freeman Road still sits there. And that was asking Brother George, look, I'm too angry. I don't think I have the emotional intelligence to be able to fight a court case for my claim or my reparations claim. And while I'm still delaying on that fight, that physical confrontation with the landowners of the people who owned my people all the way back then, information is vital, and thus connecting with other people who are in the information sharing space. Because they can't see the reparations conversation from truckloads of money. This doesn't even come close if it was $1 trillion sitting there. No, they can't see $100 billion and see the potentiality of $100 billion for the collective. So what does Brother Moses do? I continue to work in the space using my homeboy from the hood, from my same hood, his platform to have debates. And on those debates, I give the information that I've been researching. And from that, I'll give you my opening round once again on how Black or Pan-Africanism and Black society competes. I said, Black society is competing in the capitalist economic system. We stack up comparatively to entire countries in dollars per household by the World Bank standards. This is a unique position as descendants of slavery that we have. And we progress using the systems and networks available. That part of the conversation is for those who say, well, there's nothing unique about us. Bullshit. Yes, there is. Oh, there is no Black collective. There is no Black community. The people who would try to disavow our space. I'm not one of those. And in fact, I'm one who says, and us is still against those other countries who espouse an affinity towards colonialists or imperialists or the old monarchies, that old money. And as we vie for control of resources, we progress using the systems and networks we develop. B1 Network is developing a network where we can connect and continue to have this discourse. It's the same lane as the W.E.B. Du Bois or The Crisis. It's using media. It's the same one from Amy Jacques Garvey, using journalism. We're carrying forward that tradition. And not only do we do so in a way that supports Black progress, we can talk economics if you want. We can talk politics. We can talk celebrity theory. We can talk what's going on today. We can show the images of what those who aspire to the imperial mind state are doing today, how they are provoking us, even though we're still peaceful. We can continue to chronicle that. And that is a much needed endeavor. I like to go to the Crisis archives and look at the newspapers. It rejuvenates me on my journey, but that research is still purposeful and intentional. The last part here, we influence the world, which is why I said hip hop. Even on the panel today, I was talking about from the lens of using media and what we have. Education for Zayek's Institute, or Brother Q Butter, who was there. Information, man, as he's growing his subscriber count and working with people like African diaspora. If you're building a multinational platform and somebody from Africa logs in and becomes a subscriber, what are you going to do? Kick them out? No, but you are influencing the world and you're doing so under your own validity. And so what does that build into? Social capital. Many people like to stick with the politics. We can discuss politics, but that's just not where I live. I'm not your fucking politician. That's somebody else's argument. And then I said that even during the debate, all of this, despite institutional racism that undermines us as a competitor. And so I've given you 4 theories, even the competition, religion to religion here, just information for you to consider. But I will continue to stand on that square. That's me. To what extent do you see Black society competing? Well, I gave it to him then. I asked him what he thinks the median net income was. My debate opponent showed him that information on a global scale, even showed him some of the ones that were doing a little bit better in their household, to ask the question, where are you at? Look at the UK. I said compare us to like France, which is one of those places that is an imperial ruler like Spain, even in spaces like Africa. Fort Augustine or in Florida is another space where we have that. They don't want to talk information and facts. And so I'll give them some more shit. Son of historic Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall is still on that bullshit. You see him pictured here, and this is what happens when that system argument goes wrong, where you have this biracial argument going wrong, where they no longer ascribe to the blackness and they start to think that they are part of the multinational imperial enterprise. No, you're not. And economics means that you may be able to buy yourself in or get a board of directors role, but what will your actual influence be in those spaces to protect the public good? Why is that important? CoreCivic, which is U.S. prison operating company, had their annual meeting of stockholders May 14th, 2020. They had to do something, right? They're in a COVID space where their prisons are the ones that are showing high body counts. And those same prisons are the ones where they've locked up some of our most radical brothers. And in this criminal justice reform era where we're using information and black leadership to try to get more black people free, to try to get more favorable laws on the books, this is what we're up against. That flip-flopping Negro who was born, you know what I'm saying? Look, man, Thurgood Marshall and his son, and what happened to that legacy of fighting? If the NAACP's Treasury Fund and legal defense was founded by Thurgood Marshall, and then I have to show you NAACP lobbying money is now only $500,000, and then show you the books on Thurgood Marshall Jr. and what their lobbying is doing today to lock niggas up. Man, what more can I say? Private prison firms form advocacy groups to rebut scrutiny. We remember back in 2019 when they started talking about it and the disproportionate numbers of African Americans and what was happening in some of those prisons. Taz Exclusive has given some information about the prisons and what's happening there. Even during the coronavirus outbreak, we've still continued to have this conversation and push forth this narrative. B1 Brother Moses says, oh, it's institutional. So I go to the leading U.S. prison operating company, their annual meeting of the stakeholders, and I listen to the information that they have to share on what they consider gains. Where do we go wrong? Well, dream activists, so those undocumented students who are looking to get Thurgood Marshall Jr. to resign, and created a petition even. A petition that was actually created by the African-American woman consultant that they were partnering with. And they went in on them. This is the dreamers and undocumented students who tried to go in on this dude. I mean, they called him everything under the sun but a man of God. They shamed him using the same tactics that said, your dad was so vital to us. Why are you now using that legacy against us? You've been there since 2002. If your influence has not been able to increase the lives, reduce recidivism, get more education amongst those inmates or that state property, then you are a proponent of the slave crow era, Jim Crow era, whatever, slave codes, black codes. You're doing everything wrong. But they don't like it when we call them sellouts. You would first have to say where they ever sold in, which is why you start with who they are and who they serve. Thurgood Marshall Jr., born August 12th, 1956 in New York. New York being that space just trying to get to Harlem. Even Frederick Douglass said, I'm just trying to get up north, Harlem Renaissance and so forth. But Malcolm X, that same space of radical thought being converted into a half black, half, I don't even know, Muttley of a man, whose legacy could give him access that other folks would not have received. Legacy that created access, and access to what? Politics or presidential spaces. He served on the cabinet there as cabinet secretary to Clinton. Oh yeah, it can go deep. We can bring out real information and start giving them what they missing. But he was chief liaison to the executive branch, director of the legislative affairs. So how did your dad go from the legal team for the NAACP and now you're the director of the legislative affairs while black folks are being mass incarcerated? Well, I'll tell you how. It's the hijacking of that same movement and towards profitability or economics. because it was more profitable and you had a nigga that was looking out for his interests. Also, there you see he served as a director and a member of the Nominating and Governance Committee since December 2012. If you find yourself debating a moot topic about anything, I would prefer it be on whether educated lanes are actually sellouts to the Black community. Sunday Rumble type information. Oftentimes you get good information even inside of the chat from other people's opinions. I love it as a concept, even when there's people inside the chat that I ultimately disagree with. Omega Dreads. I know my dude was in the chat. I kind of rock with Omega Dreads. He's a gamer and he's one of those people with a very huge mind state. Said something about the 50C3 status. To me, that is somebody saying we can do it here. What are we going to do here? How do we use white moderates to improve our situation? What systems are in place for me to leverage that I can use or that we can use to improve my quality of life? Brother Goshen, a big contributor to Black YouTube Spaces. As a supporter and financier, I would say he gives hundreds of dollars to Black YouTube or content creators. He says, I'm not going to church, LOL. As you see in my conversation, go ahead, brother. Rude Imp Rue is saying what's up to Kenny Conjo. And so that interconnected social community, online community thing starts to happen. Elise, yes, white churches constantly have activities in childcare for people. I'm not the dude who likes to keep talking about what whites and Asians and shit are doing. I try to give you information about African Americans. Hopefully y'all can appreciate that. Mr. Fantastic 824, who I definitively named Fantasia because my first interaction with Fantasia was on the Sunday Rumble and we were discussing Fantasia. And this guy gets up there screaming and hollering, and I was like, damn, he sounds exactly like Fantasia. Little sister, Fantasia. He says, George Macon driver's license. I remember at the time when this link dropped, I was like, damn, is this dude doxing? And then I just let it keep going because I wasn't as familiar with him. But I thought it was weird. Even then, just like now that I'm going over this, and I'm looking at it with this level of scrutiny, damn. I would only hope that that's not the actual driver's license of George Macon, but it does speak to the idea of how those folks who do have Black first or pro-Black ideologies, how they run into conflict with other Black people who do some shady shit competitively. I don't know if that's actually it, but you see it on the screen. Angelica, there's a church called The River in Tampa, Florida that does that. White church with a mostly Black audience. And so again, using the resources or attempting to buy resources, get control of resources, and what do you do to do so? In the Black community, there was a lot of Black churches and such. For those people who said, let's just stay here and do it. What can we do right here? I know in my hood, there was a lot of churches and shit. I don't know. A lot of liquor stores too. People that tried to numb themselves to the actual reality that their condition was real and that there were real systems and processes that were creating the condition that they had to survive. Marcus Love says white churches are flying their ministers to African countries to rape Black children. Again, you will not get any pushback from me there for those people who say this pedophilia, this Greek philosophy, this Roman Empire, this raping of Black Africa and of Black people in general, the Black woman specifically. But I also know that young Black boys are also victims of that. I don't got no pushback for that and being able to use our spaces to say, and that is wrong. And to say that whose job is it to defend against that? And then finally, you see I'm Aries queen bitch. As a kid in Texas, I went to church at least 4 days a week. Once I got back to California, it was enough of that. And so people could give their different perspectives on church and how that church is responsible for social uplift. I've given quite a few perspectives that I felt were very powerful to the conversation, good value adds. I actually wanted to share the response from CoreCivic, but that video is no longer up, and I don't feel like going through it and reviewing and rewinding and getting that back up. So I'm gonna leave that alone right there. Let's give some shout outs to those who rocked with us for this hour. Rukia, call me now. What's good with it? Nyla says the GOAT. Still looking forward to when we can get back to where Nyla says was debating Taz. I thought those were very good shows as well and shit. I am a family man, so my family orientation says, look, we love this shit. We're here for the right reasons. We know the work has to be done. Even if we disagree, this work has to be done. There is an imperial mindset that has overwhelmed a lot of folks who we think should be on our side with this. But they do have that imperial mindset where white ice is colder, and they really do want to continue to operate under the somebody else's control. I can't stress it enough. I disagree. Operating under somebody else's control is not the move. And for us, we need more radical thinking and more radical solutions. That's going to come through the exchange of information. And that's where I'm at with it. And let me do one thing here just to make sure that I am being open and free with the information. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to drop it in. It is now 1 hour and 10 minutes into my presentations. I've given 3. If there is any pushback that anybody wants to bring to B1 Brother Moses, I am all for it as well. But again, I am not the patient type. Let me give a shout out to my nephew. Ahoy, Uncle Moses. That is Xander right there. I see this guy in a lot of spaces. Like I even added him onto like my Instagram as well as my Facebook. There's a lot of folks who probably have not taken those steps yet. If you haven't added me, then that's on you. I don't always go live, but we are a part of the network, and I'm a good dude to have, man. I'm not your fucking enemy. First of all, I'm gonna give you the information whether you like it or not. And I got shit to do. I'm back to the next one. And let's move forward. We also got B1 Brother Taz. Then he did come through, man. Salute the brother, man. I wasn't looking at the back chat of shit. So my bad for missing y'all when y'all came in. But it's also there. That is the Black First News Network, a space where Black intellectuals can actually thrive, man. We getting it in. We'll continue to debate as we will amongst ourselves. But I really don't think there's too many other groups out there fucking with us, man. Our network's just too big. I mean, you can bring information from Israelites, from Muslims like Gab Talk, from atheists. You can get Caribbean, Pacific Islanders. Look, man, it just be so much information and so many perspectives here, man, that you got to find the value in this rich information sharing as a medium, man. That's what we deliver on. Look, B1 Network, we deliver content. My underlying thesis is that we have work to do and continue to do that work. So salute those brothers. There's quite a few other folks who logged in with us and had that conversation. Of course, Midtown Pookie always rocking with the kid. He gets up and says, hit tap or bang that like button, man. I appreciate that. YouTube is about the analytics. I don't need thousands of people to watch as long as the information is important to someone. If you notice somebody that can benefit from this information, be sure to share it with them. Share it for a friend. Like sometimes people don't share information because they don't know what to caption it. Just say sharing for a friend. And that's more than enough when you share the information. Sharing for a friend. Why? Because there may be somebody on your Facebook, if that's where you share it to, that values this type of information that may not even known that Thurgood Marshall Jr. While we're having the conversation, prison reform and criminalization and Black men getting gunned down and the police not going to jail, we're having that conversation in real time. And meanwhile, Thurgood Marshall Jr., his son, is still on the board of directors for the largest prison company that operates here in America. That information is good on a global lens as well, because when you think Pan-Africanism, I think the bigger argument is you can't run from this shit. And that is heavy facts. No matter where you go, there will be somebody who has declared themselves an authority who can police you. And because of that, the skill sets that you'll always hear me espouse are like, man, like even for my own daughter. I said, my daughter has to learn how to shoot. Me and my wife, I mean, we're the training shits, but me and my wife, that was one of our first dates, was to the shooting range, because that shit's real. It ain't no motherfucking game. The answer is yes. And the questions that Taz asked on that panel tonight were vital. And people would want to dismiss them and overlook it and say, are you going to train your kids and all of that? The answer is yes. It was an easy question. I don't know why motherfuckers got to stuttering and shit about that shit. The harder question was when he said, name, a Pan-Africanist movement that was bigger than the UNIA. And I was like, damn, because the first thing I thought was, damn, how big were they again? I remember Monrovia was only like 20,000. The Henry Garnett that was even less. People going and actually executing Pan-Africanist doctrines and doing that shit is few and far in between. Like Q Butter was saying, white people are doing the Pan-Africanist thing better than niggas. And they ain't even a part of it. So what does that mean? It means the competitor is the biggest beneficiary of Pan-Africanist doctrines and education and dissemination of information. And how do you know? Because they're the ones who are getting the biggest profit from those resources. Resources being either the resources there in the land, the Boers family, which I brought up, mines, the diamonds, coltan, if you're talking technology and information, cell phones and such like that. I mean, whatever, rubber, if you're talking about Ford and the Ford Foundation and being able to get cheaper rubber. I know there's a sanction on African textiles, so it's not like clothes. The kente cloth was probably made in China or something like that too. Sugar is another one. Cocoa is another major commodity. And I like cocoa, man. Fuck are you talking about, man? Fuck you mean. Anyway, do I actually benefit? I know in my life and even in my children's life, do we benefit from Africans? And then the answer would be yes, because many of the damn classrooms that my kids are in, even in that STEM category, are taught by Africans. No lie. Even at Morehouse College, it wasn't just a black man or an ADOS black man. It was a fucking African who was teaching that chemistry, that STEM shit. And so they have made themselves an intricate part of the education system. And I know the whole education system on ballots is bullshit. But if you're going to tell me that information about science is bad, like biology and all of that shit, then me and you would probably disagree. Not when we're going up against the eugenics society. Man, fuck you mean? Ain't no double talking me. Now we need that shit. We need all of that shit. If you're going up against biochemical warfare, like Dr. Wesley Muhammad says, then you're going to need somebody who can revert that shit. Not just people who can talk about proper health, but how do you even produce it? That's just where I'm at with it, man. Anyway, and I know we're in engineering. I know we're in councils and we're on committees, house judiciaries, and black women like the CBC president, Karen Bass, and all of that politics. Economically, we could tell you that the richest African-American man invested in that same STEM using technology and technology companies and buying those resources and becoming a shareholder in those resources to propel Vista Capital, which is Robert Smith, the same dude who went to Morehouse and made it rain on them motherfuckers and said the asset that I'm buying is all the debt that was attached to these young students and their loans. That's the richest African-American man. But just like I can appreciate that information, I could also appreciate the information of those leaders in Nigeria. On whole, 30,000 or less, or 15,000 where people are still suffering. Sounds a hell of a lot like Mississippi or Cleveland or the hood to me. I have no reason to discriminate against what those brothers got to fight against in their conquest or their reconquest of land. One of the news stories that surfaced is this pushback that they're receiving for reclaiming their own land. And while I'm pro-black, I would say, nah, they needed to be standing up and try to reclaim their land. That's Africans who are finally stepping up and saying, nah, nigga, this is ours. You will also hear people say, well, China's the one buying that land or whatever it is. Nah, you got it fucked up. Look at the ones who are actually fighting and advocating to buy their land back and see where they're going before you make that statement. In general, yes, multinational enterprises coming out of China are moving into Africa, just like there are multinational enterprises coming out of America. Pro-blacks or the Pan-Africanist lens that says, well, who's doing it? I would say, well, look at Professor James Smalls. He got a hotel in Africa, man. He's trying to do what he could do. Do you need more? Telecommunications is a broader space. And so you would only be able to compare it to somebody who owns weather satellites and things like that. Byron Allen, who uses 1861. 1961 of the Civil Rights Act of 1860. 66. Give me the real information, and I'll tell you if that shit's vital to our uplift. Big old Bentley B's, man. I'm gonna drop facts, and people don't have to agree with the facts. I don't spin. If you think that I got to spin on the facts, then you can come on in and tell me what you think my spin is. What do you think my spin is? I am truly in favor of those strategies that will propel Black uplift. I can understand that there are some that have failed and they continue to take major L's. And I'm not going to tell any individual that they should not adopt those failed strategies, because them niggas may be able to make it they may be able to make it work even better than Robert Smith. Immigration ideology and so forth. He tries to stay away from politics and such. I'll give you another one though to keep it all in respect. Pharmaceutical company giant, another most notable influential African-American, Kenneth over there at Pfizer, was one of those people who was appointed to to Donald Trump's American Manufacturing Council. He quit after that white supremacist attack or provocation there in Charlottesville. He quit because he said that the remarks made by Donald Trump were not aligned with his personal beliefs or views, as well as not the views of America. Now, whether or not you believe, that's a good one, but he quit. That's in today's news. It's using current events as they're trying to compare Joe Biden and his racial resume up against the racial resume of Donald Trump. Politics, for those who like politics, and those who have added me on Facebook will also see why that's relevant. And then bigger than that, though. Oh, let me back up. I didn't even know that I was on the actual screen. Look, man. Politics is somebody else's wing. Do you have political connections? What are your political connections able to produce is a different stream. In Black media or Black YouTube media, your ability to network, can you collaborate with another content creator, the type of information that you all present, that using media as a caveat for uplift or education, I'm with all of that shit. Just like Ziyex Institute has a sustainable business model as a school for disseminating information. It's even more structured because it has curriculum. Now, our biggest argument, or many people's biggest argument, I use Carter G. Woodson, is the miseducation of the Negro, which is why I would support a proper education, which is why I would donate to Ziyex Institute, which is why I would connect with Cuba, the founder of an online platform for education as a Pan-Africanist, and make sure that I throw my coins towards that Black business. I understand that it operates as a multinational enterprise, one that can do live stream Zoom classes and things using the tools that are available to him here in America. And because I understand that, I encourage more of it. I don't use the talking points that would discourage more people from doing so. That's just not what I do. I'm on the side that says there are advantages, there are benefits, and there are ways that it can be executed on an individual or a collective basis. And I give information of how it is being executed. People don't like the CBC, for example. They look at Karen Bass and they look at Auntie Maxine Waters. One of the major criticisms is their interconnection with these dreamers of the Dreamer Act. But one that they don't criticize, some do, some don't, is their connections with Africa as business and trying to get in with the African Union. In order to get there, I know the most recent African Union conference was held in Egypt. Again, information that I shared here, that I shared on O'Shea's, but then in this presentation, I also covered and showed their influence. Then in today. And so while the B1 network can be overlooked, or they think that we're talking in circles, I'm here to tell you that no, we're not. We actually have people who are doing the work, connecting and networking and building the infrastructure for what it is we say we advocate, which is the dissemination of information on a global scale that will be towards Black empowerment. No, we don't have to change the theme because we've taken some L's by partnering with people who were not deserving, people who ultimately ascribe to the imperial side more than they ascribe to the anti-imperial side of this debate. There are people who are leaning more towards integration and how we can benefit here and do what we need to do here than those who are saying, nah, man, we got us. And if we are all we got, then that's enough. And while I connect with Midtown Pookie, he gets it, which is why he comes back. I'll be preaching to the choir if it was only for Midtown Pookie. Share it with the people on your friends list so that they know that there are other people who just might think like them. Why? Because we keep taking L's otherwise. These other groups that they love to mention, like the Asians and the white supremacy groups, they love to talk about them. While I'm saying, look, man, we right here and we doing it. We can market with each other. We can help build the platform. We can connect. There's ideas that we bounce off each other, iron sharpening iron. But that first requires the person that you're building with to be iron. If they ain't solid, then there's going to be issues. Look, here's what happens when you're iron trying to sharpen non-iron. They break. They are brittle, and parts of them begin to be chipped away. It's not like the sand that becomes a pearl in an oyster's mouth. If they are not iron and they are rubbing up against iron, then your abrasiveness will cause them to break and shatter. Little things like disagreements over economics, $10,000, a conversation that I have with my 11-year-old. Become the major distractions. And while we are still fighting against insurmountable odds in some people's minds, I tell you that nah, these odds ain't insurmountable, and we are following the same vein as the crisis aptly named. We are at a position of crisis of consciousness when it comes to some of the people who are deflecting from our platform. It's a crisis. Somebody is optimistic and is as much projection as I use, still has to go up against somebody who says, nah, niggas ain't shit. And if you do business with black folks, then and black businesses fail, and the black education rate and drop out and recidivism rate, black people keep going back to jail. And these are all of the things that they say are so wrong with it, not knowing that they are talking to somebody who is operating on the lens that says, and what are we doing to prevent it? Continuously providing the information of what we're doing to prevent it. Continuously. Like on one of my more recent streams, the President's Council for those opportunity zones that they keep talking about. I shared the actual conference call live. Who else do you want? You're the people who keep saying economic benefit, economic benefit. And so I actually, political partnerships, and we need representatives, we need lobbyists. And so I share in real time the people who are doing it. And they say, well, the B1 network is a scam network. How, nigga? The actual biggest scam that happened is the small businesses, our small businesses that were denied access to those loans. And we got our ass whipped again. We took a L. I shared that they were live and they had entire committees standing by. Operation Hope was the fact that I shared. Live committees standing by to help anybody who has a business, African Americans they deal with, help you fill out the paperwork you needed to apply if you hadn't applied yet. I even testified that my wife was one who, other than me giving her the information, she didn't even know that she could apply for a grant, which is what I pushed my wife towards. But I shared the information. How are you fighting back against small businesses failing? Well, the African Americans who had the council with the White House and saw there was an opportunity, one of the people sharing their call was my fighting back. Because they are the ones who had the highest level of access to those funds, those more than 50 banks that were available. So you share the information about the loans for those small businesses to actually get the loans if they needed them. That's the most that I could do. I can't fill out the paperwork for you. I'm not your bitch. Nigga, no. Brother Moses gave you the information that was needed. If you didn't have a small business or you felt like you wouldn't qualify, then that was a psychic violence played against you. Because they like to talk about those other groups, but let's ask these niggas, did they apply? Was their household a recipient of any of that? If the answer is no, then don't talk to me about the economic argument about what black people need to do economically. I'm the nigga that's actually sharing the highest level of content that you would have needed for that. Not just talking about it, but sharing the information from the people who partnered with those banks to deploy this resource that those same African Americans who are saying, well, we need more black people to do it, those black people could benefit from. So what are black people building? Well, they just showed you they built an entire network to help more black businesses get their PPP grant or whatever it is. You are sole proprietor and you are responsible for what you did, or what your salary is contingent upon your business status. You are your business, basically. And so your employment status was contingent upon whether or not you could continue to sell. If the answer was no, my business was impacted by coronavirus, or if the answer was, look, up until then, they hadn't leveraged the Small Business Association for any resources. Whatever the excuse would be, you can't talk, let's play the economic game with Brother Moses. Not when I'm the same dude who's giving you the highest level of utility for the economic game. The direct, what is the solution, was inside of my damn material. It was inside the content. It ain't my fault you missed it, or that you prefer celebrity gossip and celebrity child support and celebrity paternity tests. You prefer the Maury Povich type of, no, I don't need to get super popular for this shit, because the facts are going to be the facts one way or the other. My job is to keep giving that information, and that's what I do. Don't hold me accountable for the economic liberation of our people. Civil rights is something that I understand on an individual household, and I understand that there's a politics to civil rights, but that is not my agenda in black media. I'm not the guy coming on telling you how to improve your credit score, although I could probably talk about that. I'm not the guy telling you how you can buy more assets, although I could probably talk about that. Even on my Instagram, I show like little stocks and things that I am following. I'll share the information, but I'm not the one to tell you that that is what's for you. I'm not the one to tell you how to gamble your life. But you are in a perpetual war. The economic war, or the actual physical war, is the one Taz is telling you is the one that is probably going to have the biggest impact. And the reason why the condition is continually perpetuated is the avoidance of that reality. Trying to avoid that. That's it. The continuation of provocation will continue until at some point you can shut down those who are provoking your people. Provoking them how, Brother Moses? Well, through the enforcement of their, with law enforcement, or the enforcement of their bills and policies heavy-handedly towards your people, creating those conditions. How else, Brother Moses? Well, Dr. Wesley Muhammad talks about chemical castration. Then it is through what chemicals they're putting in the plants and the foods that your people are, that our people are consuming. So how are they fighting against us? Well, it is through diet. How do you fight back? We'll continue to partner with people who can bring valuable information on diet. Mass incarceration is the major one today, and so I had to bring that information about Thurgood Marshall Jr. I am so heartbroken by Pan-Africanism, though. I am. Just because I believe in it and I understand that we're all globally connected and that us in the diaspora have work to do, that we should, fighting against each other is divisive and all of that, and understanding individual interactions, business to business. And do I want to get an apartment in Africa, though? No. The return to Africa, do I feel like return to Africa? Nigga, I'm from Del Paso Heights. I can't afford to live there, Northern California. If I return anywhere, it would be to the home of my father, which is like Shreveport, Louisiana. They got the same type of issues there. I don't disagree with do what you got to do here, but you're not going to turn me away from the concept. That ain't going to happen. If a motherfucker from Africa came into this chat right now and was like, Brother Moses, I would love to do business with you, I would say, what do you got? If he said, Brother Moses, I think your media should be shared with my network in Africa, I would say, go on and hit that. If he said, Brother Moses, I remember when you were talking about being in South Africa, you said you went to the embassy. Do you have the connection of the brother who is in South Africa? I would say, yes, I do. What else? The entire conversation then was whether or not O'Shea Duke Jackson should continue to operate in Africa, if you ask me. If you're saying, is there any benefit? The answer is yeah. Nigga, we see the benefit. What more do you need? I'll give you education. Carter G. Woodson missed education, so therefore the solution then would be the education. And the type of education that I present is one that says a revolutionary education. I want to see that shit in Hollywood film, how that motherfucker moved as a unit. And it was a coup, what they call it, a coup d'etat, when he came into office. But the Taz was well versed and was able to say, well, it was another coup that threw his ass out. That's right, because Thomas Sankara was going against imperialists and those who prefer imperial rule. And so he came in with his Marxist ideology and democratic principles and all of that. He came in with his group of hitters. They were military folks, mind you. And his homie was president at the time that he served with up in Morocco. They came in. He was prime minister. He called up Muammar Gaddafi, came, visited them. They had that I could go into it in more detail. I won't, though, because then it seems romanticized and rather than just being the real information. This is literally what happened. And I think it's one hell of an information share, one hell of a story. And in fact, while those African actors are trying to portray Black folks, then I would almost go as far as to say, well, what African Americans should portray Thomas Sankara just to give them that taste of their own medicine, right? If there was one, it'll probably be like Lawrence Fishburne, maybe. More in the character of O-Dog than Inkwell. Lorenz Tate, who else? Like to try to capture the face, it would probably not, because what you couldn't do is put Cheatham back into another role like that, because he's already Hotel Rwanda, so they'll start conflating the story. So using it as messaging, it wouldn't work that way. But I got to think about maybe Kendrick Lamar in the face. Like if you look face wise, maybe Kendrick Lamar without the dreads or whatever it was could probably play that role, and he definitely can encapsulate it with his experience there on West Coast and so forth. Who else? That young bull who won that singing competition out of Los Angeles, who does it in Spanish or whatever. Why? Because the language there, French. Damn, did you give me one of them, son? That's shady. Anyway.
I didn't have enough. He gave me an extra free one because I didn't have enough.
So you got two?
Yeah, I got one for the $10.
Oh, well, you looked out for your little sister. That's what's up. You didn't want to look my way. I couldn't get a bite of nothing. What else? Hopefully we get it, though. The young brother out of Los Angeles, though, because, again, you're talking about people who, on one end, they understand the dynamics of the system, that there are processes in place and that any of those processes can be a point of contention, right? There are provocations that are occurring that African Americans are just forced to endure, just forced to. And there is nothing that an African American seems can do but endure those provocations. Yeah, appreciate it. Corn, chili, everything.
I put everything on.
And some of those provocations originate in miscommunication. Some of them originate in misinformation. The ones that I'm most focused on, damn, that shit was hella good. That I'm most focused on are the ones that are on our side of the globe, or this Pan-Africanist movement. So in America, amongst Blacks, and inside of that Black, I focus on those who are for Black progress. Not necessarily, to me, you don't even have to be against imperial rule as much as you need to be for Black progress. If I could have it my way, I would say you need to be absolutely against imperial rule to be for Black progress. That would go hand in hand, but I can't have it my way. And so my only compromise then would be, look, I understand that you are not against white folks. I get that. Are you for Black people? And if you can answer that as still an affirmative, yes, I don't care whether you think it's Black people in America or Black people anywhere else, the Black woman, I don't care if you call her God or if you call her bitch, the Black man, I don't care if you call him a pookie or a nigga, or the educated, if you call them lame, whether your political identity politic is Republican or Democrat or independent or none of the above. Religion, I don't discriminate there either, whether you're from Islam and that sect and how that sect is competing against like Christians and Catholics and all of that. If that's what you ascribe to, ISUPK or Israelites or whatever, I can understand that how the pro-black or being for black can even play in any of those spaces. ISUPK is the one that I mentioned earlier. Why? Because they specifically talk about, it's not recidivism. I don't think they use that word, but what happens to our brothers once they're finally released from that beast. And that's important to me coming from Del Paso Heights. It's important to me because I talk about criminal justice reform. I talk about restorative justice in the form of reparations. That's as far as the economic argument goes for me. Everything else for me is the military science. I advocate train up your daughters to shoot because there are some weirdos in this world. B1 Network, Brother Moses. That's all I got, and I'm out. Hold up. Why they tripping off? Money, I'm just not an individual. I get cashed out, then I dip and roll. Bars. I ain't studying no astronomy. I'm studying all these haters that surrounding me. Yeah, bars. Hey, man, you know what I need? I need Brother Rob to finally come on this bad boy and go and have that conversation, man. For me, I prefer to have a conversation using music. I love that rap shit, man. Bars.